Have you ever sat quietly in your living room, looked at your grown children, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, you said too much over the years? Not in anger, not with ill intent, just things you thought were helpful, honest, maybe even loving, but looking back now, you're not so sure. It's one of those thoughts that visits us in the quiet hours, isn't it? As we age, we start seeing our words differently. We realize that some things once spoken carry more weight than we expected, especially when spoken to our children. You've raised your kids. You've done your best. And now, maybe they're grown. Maybe they have kids of their own, and you're trying to maintain a respectful, loving relationship without overstepping. That balance, that line between being honest and being wise, it's not always clear. That's why this conversation matters. Today, we're going to talk about 9 things you should never say to your children. Not because you're hiding the truth, but because you've learned, through experience and through wisdom, that not all truths need to be spoken. This isn't about silence. It's about a silence that protects, the kind that preserves dignity, yours and theirs. Let's begin with a story. Linda, a mother in her 60s, was always proud of being open with her kids. No secrets, she used to say. Honesty keeps us close. But over time, she noticed something strange. The more she told them about her struggles, her regrets, her opinions, the more distant they seemed to grow. One evening, over dinner, her son Ethan looked down at his plate and said quietly, "Mom, sometimes I wish you wouldn't tell me everything." It was like a crack in a mirror, small but undeniable. That's when Linda realized something crucial. Honesty without boundaries can become a burden. Let's talk about the first thing you might want to keep to yourself, your financial stress. You see, when we're young parents, we carry so much. Bills, budgets, fears about the future. And it's tempting to share that with our kids as they grow, especially when they ask for things or question why we say no. Linda once made this mistake. Her grandson wanted a new toy, and her daughter hesitated. "We can't afford that," she snapped. Linda, trying to explain, said, "You know, when your mother was young, we couldn't afford a proper birthday gift some years. We were drowning in debt." The room went quiet. Her daughter's face changed. And later that night, Linda realized she had taken a moment of parenting from her daughter and made it about her past hardship. Sharing your financial struggles might feel like honesty, but it often plants fear, guilt, or resentment in your children. Especially when they're young, they don't yet have the tools to understand money. They only hear danger. And even when they're older, they might hear it as pressure or shame. Instead of saying, "We're broke," say, "We're being careful with money right now." Instead of, "We lost everything when you were little," say, "We made it through tough times and we're stronger for it." The strength here lies in quiet composure, acknowledging reality without dramatizing it, teaching without unloading. Now let's look at another moment many of us have experienced: marital conflict. You and your partner, maybe your spouse, maybe someone from long ago, have had your share of arguments. That's part of life. But have you ever found yourself venting about those arguments to your children? Linda did. After a tough week with her husband David, she let her frustration slip out during a phone call with her daughter Emily. "Your father never listens," she sighed. "I don't know how I've stayed married this long." Emily laughed nervously and changed the subject. But Linda could sense something had shifted. The trust, the stability, something was unsettled. When we share our relationship frustrations with our children, we think we're just being real. But to them, especially if they love both parents, it feels like being forced to pick sides. Even adult children can feel caught in the middle. This doesn't mean you need to pretend everything is perfect. But there's a difference between being honest and dragging them into a storm they didn't ask to be part of. If you're upset, tell a friend. If you need to talk about a fight, talk to your partner. or a counselor. But spare your children the weight. They didn't cause the tension. They shouldn't have to carry it. Here's where a powerful lesson emerges. Don't speak from emotion. Speak from principle. And sometimes, don't speak at all. Linda learned to say things like, "Every couple has disagreements, but we're figuring it out." It's truthful, without being harmful. Let's move to something even more personal. Your own past mistakes. Now, this one's tricky, because we often believe that sharing our mistakes helps our children learn. And yes, sometimes it does. But sometimes it backfires. When Ethan, Linda's son, was debating whether to switch majors in college, Linda shared a story from her youth, how she once forged a professor's signature to get out of a class she hated. She meant it to be funny, a cautionary tale. But Ethan looked horrified. "You always told me to be honest," he said. "How can you say that now?" Linda realized then that the story, though true, had undermined the values she'd spent years trying to teach. Your past is your teacher. But your children don't need every lesson in graphic detail, especially when those stories can shake their image of you. The image that, whether you know it or not, helps them feel stable and safe. It's not lying to keep some stories to yourself. It's wisdom. You can say, "I've made mistakes too, but I learned from them." You don't need to drag out the whole memory, especially if it will leave more confusion than clarity. Our past does not define us, but it can inform us. Choose what you share. Share it for their growth, not your release. By the time Linda turned 65, she had come to a new understanding. Her role was no longer to lead her children by hand, but to guide them by example. That meant more silence, more listening, fewer confessions, more presence. And that's the quiet wisdom of age. We've covered some heavy ground here, and maybe you're already thinking back to your own moments. Conversations that went too far, stories that came out too raw, confessions that landed with more weight than intended. That's okay. We've all done it. But we can also choose, starting now, to speak with more purpose. To protect rather than unload. To be the calm voice, not the loud one, not the oversharing one, but the wise one. There's still more to explore, more gentle truths to uncover, and more ways to create peace, both in your children's lives and in your own. Let's keep going. Now Linda found herself thinking more carefully before speaking. She no longer rushed to share every memory or emotion with her children. Not because she had anything to hide, but because she had learned that wisdom sometimes means knowing when to be silent and when to speak with intention. There was another lesson she had to learn the hard way, and it's one many of us can relate to. One afternoon, while chatting with a neighbor on the front porch, Linda complimented the neighbor's grandson. "He's got such a gift for sports," she said. "I wish Ethan had that kind of drive. He's more into art, I suppose." What she didn't realize was that Ethan was standing just inside the screen door, and he heard every word. Later that evening, he was unusually quiet. Linda noticed, asked if something was wrong, and Ethan, with a tight smile, simply said, "Nothing." But she knew. The moment hung in the air, heavy and silent. A simple comment, meant to be light, even affectionate, had planted a seed of comparison. And comparison, even unintentional, can wound more deeply than we realize. When we compare our children to others, even in passing, it can make them feel like they've already failed in our eyes, that they don't measure up, that who they are isn't quite enough. And sometimes those feelings stick with them for years. We're taught to focus on what we can control, our thoughts, our words, our actions. We can't control how talented or driven our children are compared to others. But we can control the way we talk about them. So instead of comparing Ethan to another child, Linda learned to reflect on Ethan's own progress. She started saying things like, "I remember when you were afraid to show anyone your sketches. Now you're putting your art online. That takes courage. This kind of praise, focused on growth, not comparison, strengthens self-worth. It says, I see you. I see how far you've come. Linda also noticed something else during this time. Her grandchildren were growing up fast, and she began to think more about the image she projected, not just as a mother, but as a grandmother. She had always tried to be the strong one, the one who held everything together, the one with the answers. But one small moment changed that. She was slicing vegetables in the kitchen when she nicked her finger with the knife. It wasn't serious, but it startled her, and in a flash of pain and frustration, she muttered a word she wouldn't dare repeat here. Ethan and Emily looked up in shock. "Mom?" Ethan said, half laughing, half concerned. "You okay?" Linda looked at them, holding a paper towel to her finger, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't pretend. She didn't wave it off or change the subject. She just sighed and said, "Even moms mess up sometimes." That small moment became a turning point. Her children, now adults, saw her in a new light. Not less than who she had been before, but more human, more real. And it was freeing. There's a myth we sometimes buy into, that as parents we must be perfect, always composed, always strong. But perfection is not what our children need. What they need is authenticity. Someone who can admit, "I don't always get it right, but I'm still learning." It's not about being an unshakable statue. It's about staying calm in the storm, honest in our humility, and steady in our efforts to live with purpose. So Linda began a new tradition: growth talks. When something went wrong, whether it was a small cooking mishap or a disagreement with a friend, she'd talk about how she handled it. Not to seek sympathy, but to model self-reflection. She'd say, "I didn't like how I reacted, but I took a deep breath and asked myself what I could do better next time." Her daughter Emily started doing the same with her own kids. The ripple effect was undeniable. There was one more moment that taught Linda something powerful about the stories we carry and the ones we choose to share. She was cleaning out the attic one weekend when she stumbled across an old letter. It was written by her father, decades ago. In the family, he had always been remembered as a strong, noble figure, a quiet war veteran with dignity and discipline. But the letter revealed something different. Her father had once deserted his post. It was never spoken of, never acknowledged. And reading it now, Linda's heart was torn. Should she tell her children? The answer wasn't simple. She believed in honesty. But she also understood that truth, without care, can hurt more than it helps. So she sat with it. She asked herself, what will this truth teach them? Will it help them understand their family better, or simply confuse and hurt them? Eventually, she chose to share it, but gently. She told her children, "There's something I recently learned about Grandpa. It doesn't change who he was to us, but it does remind me that everyone carries private battles. That strength comes in many forms." Her children didn't recoil. They listened. They asked questions. And by the end of the conversation, they weren't disillusioned. They were inspired. That's the beauty of thoughtful storytelling. You don't need to bear every scar. But when you do choose to speak, you do it with care, context, and courage. Linda also began to think more deeply about the expectations she had held for her children, many of which she'd never even voiced. Yet somehow, they were felt. Ethan once admitted he'd been afraid to study art because he thought she wanted him to go into business. She never said it outright, but her tone, her praise, her stories had all pointed in that direction. It hurt to hear, but it was also a gift, because she realized that unspoken expectations can shape a child just as much as spoken ones. And often, without us even knowing, they take root. From then on, Linda made space for open conversations, not just about school or jobs, but about dreams. She asked, "What lights you up?" Not, "What are you doing with your life?" She learned to listen more, to guide less. And in doing so, her relationships grew stronger, not because she controlled them, but because she released them. It's not easy. Letting go never is. But wisdom often means recognizing where our control ends and where our influence begins. And that brings us to something few parents want to talk about: favoritism. You may not think you show it. You may believe you've always loved your children equally, and you probably have. But sometimes the words we choose, or the words we don't, create a different story in our children's minds. One day, Linda was praising Emily for keeping her house so tidy. "You've always been so organized," she said. "Unlike your brother." It was meant to be light, teasing, familiar. But Ethan didn't smile. He looked away. Later, he confessed that growing up he always felt like he had to prove himself. That no matter how hard he tried, Emily was the good one. It broke Linda's heart. She hadn't meant to create that division. But she realized something important. Love isn't just about how much you feel. It's also about how equally you show it. So she changed. She started setting aside time for each of her kids, one-on-one. She explored Ethan's art world with him. She joined Emily in the kitchen, not because she was trying to balance the scales, but because she wanted each child to know, "I see you," not just as part of the family, but as someone whole and unique. Because in the end, that's what every child, no matter how old, needs to feel. And that, my friend, is what makes your voice so powerful, even now. You may be in your 60s, your 70s, even your 80s. But your presence, your quiet guidance, your willingness to learn and adapt, that still matters. In fact, it may matter more now than ever. Let's keep walking forward. There's still more to uncover. By now, Linda had begun to see parenting not as a job with an end date, but as a lifelong calling that simply changes shape. She wasn't raising children anymore. She was nurturing adults. And sometimes that meant doing less, saying less, trusting more. There was one final lesson that came not from something she said, but from something she chose not to say. It was a Saturday morning, and the house was full. Ethan and Emily were both visiting with their families. Grandkids ran through the halls, and the kitchen was alive with noise and warmth. But in the middle of it all, Linda noticed a small disagreement brewing between the cousins, over a toy, of course. She started to step in. The instinct was strong, automatic. But something stopped her. She remembered something she had read not long ago. Sometimes silence is not absence. It's wisdom. So instead of interrupting, she watched. She let the moment unfold. And to her surprise, the children worked it out. No shouting, no crying. Just a few small compromises, and the laughter returned. That was the moment Linda understood the true power of wise silence. In our younger years, we often think that parenting is about always having the right answer, the right rule, the right reaction. But over time, we learn, through both joy and error, that the most powerful presence we can offer is often the quietest one. A gentle gaze, a calm nod, a knowing smile that says, "I trust you to figure this out." Someone once said, "Say nothing unnecessary." That doesn't mean being cold. It means being intentional, choosing your words as carefully as you'd choose a gift. Linda began practicing what she called the 5-second rule. Before responding, she would pause. Just 5 seconds. Just long enough to ask herself, does this need to be said right now? Or can I hold space and listen? What she found was extraordinary. The less she jumped in, the more her children opened up. Conversations deepened. Confessions came more freely. Ethan once shared a struggle he was facing at work, not because he needed advice, but because he needed someone to hear him. And that's the part we sometimes forget. Our children, especially when they're adults, don't always need our wisdom. They need our presence, our respect, our calm confidence in their ability to handle their lives, even when we might do it differently. Silence, when practiced with intention, becomes a form of love. It says, "I am here with you, not above you." It says, "I don't need to fix you. I trust you." Linda started to apply this to every corner of her family life. She'd sit quietly while her daughter cooked, just enjoying the sounds of the kitchen. She'd take slow walks with her grandchildren, asking more questions than giving answers. She replaced lectures with laughter, control with curiosity. The result wasn't distance. It was closeness, a different kind of closeness, one rooted in mutual respect, in space to grow, in freedom to be. She also made peace with the idea that not every family truth needed to be spoken aloud. There were things about her life, old heartbreaks, broken friendships, regrets, that she had once considered telling her children. But now she asked herself something new. Would this story help them? Or is it something I simply want to unburden from myself? If it was just to lighten her own load, she held it quietly. Not in shame, but in serenity. Because it's not about suppressing emotion. It's about elevating it, channeling it in ways that bring peace instead of chaos. And part of that is knowing that some stories are best kept in the heart, like old letters tucked in a drawer, not forgotten, but held gently. You see, being a wise elder doesn't mean being the loudest voice in the room. It means being the stillest presence, the one who has lived enough, loved enough, struggled enough to know that not every battle needs a sword. Some just need silence and time. Linda's home began to reflect that peace. Fewer raised voices, more soft spaces. Her children began to visit more often, not because she had more to say, but because she had become a refuge. And isn't that what we all want to be in the end? Not a hero, not a judge, but a soft landing, a quiet strength, a place where our children, no matter how old, feel safe to just be themselves. If you've ever worried that you talked too much when they were young, or said the wrong things when you were tired or afraid, let that go now. You're here. You're learning. That's what matters. This isn't about regret. It's about renewal. Because no matter how long we've been parents, there is always room to grow wiser, to speak with more purpose, to let silence do the talking when needed, to guide with our presence, not our pressure. And if you're watching this now, if something inside you is nodding quietly saying, "Yes, that's me," then you're already on the path of the elder who brings peace instead of opinion, stillness instead of judgment, quiet encouragement instead of control, the path of a wise parent. Not cold, not distant, but calm, loving, steady. You have earned the right to say less and mean more. You've earned the right to hold space for your family, not to fill it with noise, but to enrich it with presence. So, if this video touched your heart, if it reminded you of your strength and your wisdom, I hope you'll share that feeling in the comments. Let me know, what have you learned about silence? About letting go? About saying the right thing, or nothing at all? And if you found value here, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more conversations like this, ones that honor who you are, where you've been, and the legacy you're still shaping. Because here's the truth, you never stop being a parent, but you do get to become a wiser one. Here's to speaking less, listening more, and living with calm dignity. Here's to living your best life, at any age,